Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective. In this video, I'm going to be looking a little bit at Pastor John MacArthur's recent interview on CNN. So I've been doing some videos recently covering Grace Community Church's situation in California, where John MacArthur, the pastor of that church, and the elders there have taken a stand not to follow the California government's guidelines for meeting indoors. And their decision has created a lot of national attention, and so John MacArthur has been giving media interviews through various outlets. And one of them recently was on CNN, and I saw that interview, and I thought it would be good to look at it a little bit here and talk about it. So it's a discussion between John MacArthur and the news anchor Brianna Keilar, and it's a really good discussion, actually. I thought it was a pretty amicable interview. John MacArthur does defend their church's decision to disregard California restrictions for meeting indoors. And he, in this interview, just shows his mental acuity. I mean, he is really sharp. Even though he's over 80 years old, you can just see he's someone who's really, really good at communicating and debating. I mean, it's interesting listening to him talk to this anchor and just seeing what a good job he does at reacting to anything that she has to say that counters what he's saying. Now, that doesn't surprise me. He's been a pastor for a long time, and obviously he is in the position that he's in, and he is well known and followed by many people because of his propensity to communicate and to be able to state his position very clearly, articulate it well, and defend it very ably. In this interview with CNN, MacArthur does give a couple of points in favor of his position. And one of his arguments is that he doesn't feel that the actual health risk of the pandemic merits the action being taken by the government in California. He says that in their state there is a 99.98% chance of survival, and so having a lot of strict measures for social distancing and not allowing churches to meet indoors doesn't make sense in light of the statistics. Another thing that he points out in this interview is that people are coming to church out of their own volition. It is their personal choice to come, and so really he's emphasizing here personal, individual responsibility, that each person can make their own choice as to what is best for their own health. So those are some of the points that he's making, and the CNN anchor Brianna Keilar does make some counter arguments and tries to challenge his position in certain ways. I'll play a clip of the interaction so that you can get a taste of it.
I do want to highlight something that you recently said during a sermon. You were talking about some of the statistics that you actually just mentioned, if we can listen to that.
But there's another statistic. Half of those people who died are over 80. So if you're under 80, you have a 99.99% chance that you're going to live through this whole thing. That just does not equate to the response this society has had.
But if you just look at Friday's statistics in your county, in Los Angeles County, there were 48 deaths just in one day on Friday. And there were a little less than a third who were folks above 80, but a little less than a third were people 65 to 79, and more than a third were people aged 30 to 64. Does that raise your level of concern, knowing that actually it is not just the elderly at risk, as you're telling your congregants?
Yeah, to be honest with you, Brianna, I just don't know when the truth is being correctly represented. I know there are people counted
if I may,
with
Pastor,
COVID.
if I may, that's from the Public Health Department in Los Angeles. You doubt the numbers they're putting out?
Yeah, I actually do. I think they're having trouble in the state of California. The governor just declared that he was firing the state health director because the system, the computer system, had miscounted all kinds of things. So the whole state is in an uproar. And then he came out and said, we obviously can't ease up because we don't even know what the numbers are. So it's so chaotic. But the bottom line is, in people's own life experience, they're not seeing these kinds of things in any abnormal sense. And they came back on their own volition because this is the most essential thing in their life. They wanted to be here. They came with joy and not with fear.
One of the things that I think you can see in that interaction is the difficulty of assessing the actual risk of this pandemic. Now, I know a lot of people, I know from the comments and from hearing people, they think there's not really a risk. They think it's just something that is being conjured up by the media, and they don't really see this as a problem, something to be really worried about. But one of the things that I still keep coming back to that I think complicates the issue is that this isn't just one sector of our society that's making a big deal out of it. Really, there are so many sectors of our society that are making a big thing of the pandemic. And that includes the White House. I mean, even President Trump has talked about COVID-19 as being really a big problem and being dangerous. I also mentioned that recently I heard Senator Ted Cruz say that we have to take the coronavirus very seriously. So it's not like it's just one side or a certain sector of our society that's making a big deal out of this disease. You can really see it from all sides, including the White House, that this is a big deal. It's even affected things like professional sports, and baseball has been completely interrupted and changed because of this situation. So it seems to me that a lot of sectors of society are taking the pandemic very seriously. It's not just a certain group. And so, that's something that I think has to be factored into assessing the risk and understanding what's really going on here. At the same time, there really are two stories here. And one side is what MacArthur is bringing out, and I think this is a really valid point in many ways, that when you actually look at the numbers, how dangerous is this pandemic? He says that people in his state have a 99.98% chance of surviving. The other thing with that you have to consider is that even if you are justified in taking certain precautions, there's also a risk, a health risk, in overreacting, because it affects our economy, it affects people's mental health if they have to quarantine and they can't go to work and their livelihoods are affected. I mean, this is a big deal. So just saying, well, it's easy, we just will look at the disease and we'll react to it, neglects another serious health risk that if you overreact, then that can also create a lot of risks to people's livelihoods, their mental health, their personal health. And so I think that's another thing that has to be taken into account along with the risks of the actual disease. So that one side that MacArthur is bringing out here is that it's really questionable as to whether the government is reacting appropriately in this situation. And then the other side is what we see, and I mentioned this earlier, that the government on all sides and all levels really feels that the situation is serious enough and is saying that this is a serious enough situation that it merits restrictions and extensive measures to deal with the pandemic. And it's not just the government saying that. There are various sectors of our society that are also showing that they feel the pandemic is a very serious issue. So it really is these two things, and assessing the risk level is very challenging for a lot of us. So when it comes down to it, at this point, I would personally say that I do think it is a serious situation, obviously. I mean, people have died, and we want to take that seriously, and we want to care for our fellow humans. But I would also have to say, I mean, this is not the bubonic plague here. We're not talking about something that is highly deadly, according to what the numbers are showing us. And even if it were a really deadly disease, we have to remember that at the end of the day, we can't control everything, and we have to live our lives. And so I just think we have to get back to what are the numbers telling us, and let's act accordingly. If there is a high risk, then we want to be wise and act according to what the risk level is. If it's really not a high risk, then we have to be honest about that, and we have to act accordingly to that as well. So I just want to be reasonable about this and act according to what the actual danger level is. And I have to say, I think Pastor MacArthur makes a pretty strong point here, that the risk level from what we're seeing in the numbers doesn't merit the amount of reaction that we tend to see in our culture. And I think it's partly that we live in a very fearful and controlling type culture. And I think at the end of the day, we just have to live our lives. But of course, we want to take wise and necessary precautions according to what the actual level of risk is. So I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of thoughts about this. I know because I've been hearing them in comments on other videos, but please try to keep your comments positive and edifying. And thank you so much for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.